Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ken Sorensen. I'm a retired high school and junior college history and English teacher, and I get the glorious opportunity of coming here and being able to spend time with you and talk about various historical people and events. And today, what we're going to be doing is talking about Norman Rockwell, which just kind of brings a smile to your face because he is just such an integral part of what we remember about Americana and how it impacted us in our world. And his art just still resonates and makes us go back and remember maybe even a simpler time and in many ways a better time. And so today we're going to be talking about him, his art, and his impact. As you can see there on the screen, the opening slide shows Norman Rockwell in one of his more famous paintings, his vision of humanity. And it's a wonderful vision because he truly looked throughout the world and found inspiration and found life. And this one shows how important it is that we not only reach out to others, but we reach out to children. They need that, and we need to make the difference. Now, here's a younger picture of Mr. Rockwell. He was born in February of 1894 in New York City and grew up there in New York City. That was kind of an exciting time to be alive and see the new century change. And when he got to be about 14, 15, early high school years, he went to his parents and said, "I've decided that I don't want to go to school anymore." And you can imagine the effect that would have on virtually any parent. And we would all just about have a come apart over that and want to launch all of these great arguments about the importance of going to school. And then he went on to say, but before you really get upset about it, what I want to do is instead of going to school, I want to go to art school. Well, it was obvious to the family, and everybody knew him and the family, even then, that this young man was going to make a tremendous artist. And so they quickly made those arrangements, and he went to one of the more prestigious art schools there in the New York City area and began his career. This is kind of an interesting picture about him, and it's showing World War I, and that World War I was literally inhabited by young men. And that's usually true about most wars anyway, but what was interesting about this is that it's always been thought that this was almost a self-portrait. Why do I say that? Because when war was declared in April of 1917, he was, at that time, 23 years old. He was 6'1", and he weighed 140 pounds. So he was just literally a string bean. It was kind of interesting because he went down like all young men did, and to try and register and get in and begin the military process and get involved. And they rejected him because he was underweight. Now, wouldn't that be nice words to hear? that you were underweight? and so what happened was he went home, and over the weekend, not only ate regular meals, but he also ate donuts and bananas and juice and cookies and anything imaginable that he could find. And he went back on Monday morning and had gained 5 pounds. And so they took him. And in one of the rare moments of military brightness, as it were, what did they assign him? Because often you hear about unusual assignments based on talent and desire and all that. What did they assign him to do? They assigned him to be a military artist, and he never left the United States, which was really probably best for all involved. But I've always just loved this picture because it is such an interesting portrayal of youth and innocence and new situations and looking at your life going forward, and you're going, oh my goodness, how amazing. Anyway, he served out the war. Shortly when the war was ending, he had been dating a young woman, and her name is Irene O'Connor, and they got married. And as near as I can find, this is the only picture that he ever drew of her, which I find kind of interesting because of the way the picture looks. She's drawn from the back over the shoulder, and you see more of a profile of her face. You don't really see her whole face. And I've often thought about that. Would I draw my wife looking like this? And I don't think so, but I also don't know what they had in mind. They were married for 12 years. They never had any children. And for reasons that are not completely clear, the marriage fell apart, and they divorced in 1929. He had lived virtually all of his life in the Northeast, in New York and New England area. And so what did he do? He went to California. Okay, really? And he went west to California, and while there, some friends introduced him to this woman, and her name is Mary Barstow. They got married in late 1930, and they were married for 29 years. There was 3 children involved. They were very happy and would have lived out their life together, and she very unexpectedly died in 1959 of a heart attack. And no one saw that coming, and it just rocked his world. Shortly after they got married, he talked her into moving from California to Vermont. Well, that would be a little bit of a difference in weather and ambiance and everything else. And they moved, and they virtually spent the majority of their life there in New England. This is a picture of them in their home in Vermont. And as you can see, all of his life, he was just a thin rail of a guy. He really was. And so it wasn't just, when he was trying to get into the military. He all of his life, he was very, very thin. But they had a lovely home, and they thoroughly enjoyed their life together. They really, really did. And she was into gardening and adding beauty to their home and to their life. After Mary Barstow died in 1959, what did he do? He went back to California. Okay, I guess California is the magic answer. And so he went back to California, and he married this woman in 1961. And her name was Mary Bunderson. And it was interesting because she always went by Molly. And I say interesting because the second and the third wife both had the same first name. That probably is smart, because you don't ever inadvertently want to address them by the wrong name. And if they had the same name, then you probably would avoid that problem. Once they got married, and they lived out the rest of their lives together, and he died in 1978 and she died in 1985. By this time, he's world renowned, and they did a lot of traveling and saw the world and did great things and just enjoyed the life. And he continued to produce. The 1960s and 70s were very active painting wise for him, but they just enjoyed their life and had a great, great time together. This is a picture of their gravestone. This is the front side of the gravestone, and all the front side says is Rockwell. Okay, that makes sense. And the back side gives the details and information. It gives his name and life dates, and it lists his second and third wife and their life dates. Doesn't list children and doesn't list the first wife. That has always kind of made me wonder, because there's no right or wrong answer to what do you put on a gravestone? You put whatever you want, because it's yours and you helped design it. And it's just always interesting to see the variety, and this is what he had put on his gravestone. This is a wonderful quote by Mr. Rockwell, and explains a little bit about his artistic philosophy. Because as we all know, Norman Rockwell has a very obvious artistic philosophy, and we recognize that. We recognize his paintings and his style. This is what he had to say. I unconsciously decided that even if it wasn't an ideal world, it should be. I love that. So I painted only the ideal aspects of it, pictures of which there are no drunken slatterns or self-centered mothers. Only foxy grandpas who played baseball with the kids, and boys who fished from logs and got up circuses in the backyard. I love that. Because he wants to make sure that we see a life worth living. And as we all know, that's not always the criteria of all artists. But it was for him, which is one of the reasons that we've always had such a direct connection to the art of Norman Rockwell. Where do you go to find great Norman Rockwell collections of art? The best place is here, the Norman Rockwell Museum in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. And that has an array of virtually almost everything imaginable that he did. And it's a great, great museum. There are other collections in various parts of the world and various parts of the United States. It's fun to go see him and his art. Let's get into a little bit of his art career. It started very early, very, very early, because one of the first connections that he did was with an infant organization that just barely got started in 1910, and we know that organization as the Boy Scouts of America. They came to him and hired him virtually right out of art school. And this is the first cover that he did for Boys Life magazine. And if you raised boys in your home and you paid those fees, you likely remember getting Boys Life in the mail. And look at this cover. It's quite interesting because it says October of 1911. So obviously it was one of the early covers they'd had, and early in his life. But look at the cost, 5 cents an issue. How amazing. This is a Boy's Life cover 20 years later. This one is in February of 1932, and the cost has gone up to a screaming 20 cents an issue. But I picked out this one because this is what is known as a spirit painting. We see a Boy Scout on almost a knoll looking out and seeing the world. And then we see behind him in spirit form the drawing of George Washington, trying to point forward and help this young man moving forward in his life, which has always been the theme of Boy Scouts, is to have leaders help the young men moving forward in their lives, trying to do great things and train them and accomplish wonderful things. And that's why this painting is just so incredible. I've loved this one because this shows a young man who obviously is a Cub Scout. And what he has done is he's gone into his older brother's room and in his older brother's closet and dug out his older brother's Boy Scout uniform, and he's put on the Boy Scout uniform. Did any of your kids ever try to grow up too quickly? And you kept trying to tell them, oh, slow down, it's okay. It's okay to enjoy being the age that you are. And that's why this one is so interesting, because this young man is trying to grow up quickly and be like his brother. And it's a delightful picture. And that little dog looking at him going, really? That's not yours. This is also another wonderful picture of a Boy Scout, and he's helping teach and train Cub Scouts and giving them background on map skills, which is a great thing. What is really impressive is that the dog is sitting right between the Cub Scouts and seemingly paying incredible attention and trying to figure it all out and make it make sense to him. And it's just a wonderful picture. This is also a very touching picture of the idea of always be prepared, which is the Boy Scout motto, and be able to help rescue this young lady and carrying her out of harm's way. Kind of a reminder that we all have responsibilities to help one another in times of any kind of problem. And it's a beautiful, beautiful painting. Norman Rockwell loved children. He loved being around children. He loved the exuberance of children. He loved talking to children. And children just genuinely loved him because they caught the idea of sincerity. They caught the idea of just being friendly. There was no question in their minds that he loved them. There's all kinds of pictures that help illustrate that, but I've always loved this one because they're all just hanging on his every word and wanting to know who and what and why and how and everything about him. And it's just a great, great picture representing relationships with children. And he's all about doing great things for kids. This picture also represents a wonderful concept. And here this little girl has been told that she has to go to the doctor, and so she goes, but she's not about to let the doctor do anything to her until the doctor makes sure that her little dolly is okay. And bless that doctor's heart for recognizing the importance of validation for a child. And he's listening to the heart of that little doll and trying to help this little girl understand the doll's going to be okay, and so will you. And what a delightful picture. In the early 1930s, and if you remember what was going on in the 1930s, the Great Depression, one of the biggest problems of the Great Depression is cash flow. Because if you don't bring in money and if you don't spend money and everybody doing that, boy, the economy just comes to a screeching halt. And that's exactly what happened. He was offered a job, and it would have been extremely tempting to take that job. You may not recognize the other individual there in the picture. The other individual is someone we really don't know much about, but he's the business associate of a man we do know, and the man's name is Al Capp. You may recognize that name if you remember growing up. And Al Capp was the guy that created the comic strip of Dick Tracy. Al Capp, through this agent, contacted Norman Rockwell and wanted to hire Rockwell to do the art for a daily comic strip. It would have been quite a bit of money. Then $500 a week was a lot of money. And Rockwell thought about it and finally decided the answer is no, because Rockwell did not want to commit to such a stringent time frame and not be able to do the art that he wanted to do in the way that he wanted to do it and the time frame he wanted. And so he turned it down. And on one hand, that's a little gutsy because you're walking away from pretty good money. And on the other hand, it's incredibly commendable because you're trying to determine your own way forward. And that's exactly what he was trying to do. This is a very typical picture of Rockwell in his home, and they would have a room set aside as his drawing room, and often he would usually have 2 or 3 art boards set up, and one of them is this one. And it's kind of like the point where you put your ideas down. And so what he would do is he would be thinking of something, and so he would sit down on this one, and he would just kind of rough sketch some ideas, and if it stuck, if it was something that really looked good, then he would take that and go to one of the bigger ones and start a big painting based on this. And so this is literally his idea board. That's what this one is all about. This is an interesting picture of Mr. Rockwell. It was the last known picture that was taken of him, and it was taken 8 months before he died in 1978. Even as an elderly man, you can see, because he was 84 years old when he died, he is still just thin as a rail. But it also not only shows the art behind him, but it also shows he always pretty much believed that his life was never complete unless he had a pipe in his hand and he was smoking his beloved pipe. This is another philosophic statement by Mr. Rockwell that I've really liked. The secret to so many artists living so long is that every painting is a new adventure. So you see, they're always looking ahead to something new and exciting. The secret is to not look back. That is really good advice, because in looking back, we often get stuck in prior events in our life, and we can't change them. Even if we wanted to, we can't change them. We need to learn what we can from prior events and then move forward and go forward and do great things with the time we have in front of us. That's what he's trying to say. And it's very, very important, whether you're an artist or whatever you do. He is simply trying to tell us, move forward and do the best we can. Good advice. This is another picture of him in one of his homes, and I picked this one because if you notice there next to him is the original copy of the slide that I showed you when we began this presentation of people from all over the world and trying to create the spirit of humanity concept. And it's a beautiful painting. Early in the mid-19-teens, he began his relationship with Saturday Evening Post, and that relationship began then and lasted for over 40 years. And many of us remember trying to find a copy. If we didn't subscribe to it, then we'd run down to the stores that sell it, and we would try to find a copy to see if the cover was a new Rockwell painting. And this is one from May the 20th, 1916. It sold for 5 cents an issue. And typical with Rockwell paintings and Rockwell art is that it wouldn't be hard to take one look at the painting itself and then sit down and write the story. And Rockwell art almost invites you to do that because you can see the story. You can see the events. You can see what had happened. You take one look at this young man on the far right. You know dang well when he got up that morning, the last thing he wanted to do was to take his little brother or sister in the little buggy and push him around the streets. And Mom came to him and says, oh, by the way, today this is what you get to do. And you can see he's not real happy about it. And then he takes the child out and he's pushing the child around. And what happens? The number one thing that he doesn't want to happen, he runs into his friends. And are they giving him a bad time about being out pushing the baby stroller? Oh yeah. And you can just see the emotion and you can see the story and it wouldn't be hard to create the story and fill in the dialogue. And that's what's wonderful about Rockwell art. There's always a story. And it's just waiting to be written, because what he does is freezes a moment in time and captures that moment and just makes it come alive. This is also one of those incredible moments in time. This one is during Thanksgiving in 1943, and this one appears to be a young woman in Italy. And in 1943, during the war, we had all kinds of soldiers in Italy, and she appears to have been given a coat by a soldier in order to try and stay warm. And it appears that she is praying to God and thanking him for the kindness of an American soldier and being able to have a little bit to eat. And the irony of that at Thanksgiving time. And it's just a breathless moment in time, which is what Rockwell creates. In the early 1930s, he had a business opportunity, and a book writer, a man by the name of Will Leach, came to him and says, I've got an idea for a couple of books, and I would like to hire you to be the artist of the books, to illustrate the books. And so they worked it out, and one is called A Day in the Life of a Girl, and the other is, of course, The Day in the Life of a Boy. these are the covers of the books. Just the covers alone illustrate to us very clearly the difference between young girls growing up and young boys growing up. And girls, they get to be 9, 10, 11, 12. They're already thinking about their future, and they're already thinking about their diaries and putting down feelings and emotions and dealing with all of that and growing up. And boys, they want to read the comic books. They want to see the action. They want to see the world. And it's just a wonderful moment to see and compare gender differences. And he does a magnificent job just in these single covers of these books to help us understand that concept. This is a close-up of that sketchboard that I was mentioning, and you can see he's got several different things going on that sketchboard. It is the way he brought about ideas, because he was constantly looking for inspiration and looking around and trying to find things that would be worth painting. And he would see that and just freeze that frame in his mind, and then come home and sit down on his sketch pad and create that. And then if it was really good, then he would, as I said, he would move on. That's the way he worked. I've always loved this particular picture of his. If you look carefully, the calendar there above the couple, it shows this 1955, and this couple have gone into the county recorder's office and they are filling out paperwork for a marriage license. And I absolutely love it because they are so busy, and understandably so. They are so busy involved in looking at the paperwork and filling out the paperwork, they don't happen to look at the clerk. And I love that clerk is just sitting there going, do you have any idea what you're getting into? Do you even begin to know what you're getting into? And of course we don't. We're so far in love, we couldn't even care less of what's going to happen. We're just wanting to be with that person. And understandably so. And that's what love and marriage is all about. And then we move on down the line and we're going, oh my goodness. And it's just a delightful picture of a moment in time that we have all experienced. And it's a great, great picture. This is the first of 3 pictures that Mr. Rockwell painted as a tribute to Mark Twain. To kind of give you an idea, when Mark Twain died in 1910, Norman Rockwell was 16. Was Rockwell familiar with Mark Twain and his writing? Absolutely. Everybody was familiar with Mark Twain. He was one of the most famous writers in the world. And he lived in New England and he was in and out of New York City all the time. And people saw him in the last decade of Mark Twain's life. He made presentations all over, and so you could go and see and hear him talk. And this is Rockwell's attempt to try and honor Mark Twain. This first picture is an illustration out of Mark Twain's famous novel, Huck Finn. And fairly early in the novel, Huck and Jim have ran away, and they're on a boat, and they're floating down the Mississippi River, and they're parked for the night, and all of a sudden, here come out of the forest 2 guys, and they come running out and jump on the boat and scream, get us out of here. Turns out these guys are con men. They call themselves the Duke and the Dolphin. They are the big part of the story, and it's just a crazy part of the story. Norman Rockwell is trying to show what these people look like, and because they would go into towns and just put on demonstrations, and they would sell snake oil, imitate Shakespeare scenes. They would do all kinds of crazy stuff just to make money. Anyway, these are interesting guys. This is a picture out of Tom Sawyer. It's entitled First Smoke. And the 2 boys on each side have already tried it. Their heads are just coming apart at the seams, and Tom is trying to act all grown up and make it look like he is really mature. This is also a scene out of Tom Sawyer, and that famous scene where Tom Sawyer is told that he has to go out and paint the fence, and so he does, and gets paint, and he's painting the fence, and he's whistling and singing and seemingly having a good time. And friends come walking up, what are you doing? Oh, I'm painting the fence, and it's wonderful. And he's painting away, and the friends go, well, that's not fun, that's work. Oh no, it's a great time, and I'll even let you help for a quarter. And pretty soon, all kinds of friends at a quarter apiece are helping paint the fence, and he's sitting back watching all this, just counting his money and smiling. And it's just a delightful, delightful scene out of Tom Sawyer. I've loved this one because this one is absolutely just takes your breath away. Here is a picture of a young lady who is literally in the transition of childhood into teenagehood. and she's right on the cusp, and she's looking at a mirror, and on her lap is a magazine of a very famous actress of the time, and down on her left is her doll. And she's looking in the mirror, and she's showing how we transition from childhood into pre-adulthood. And you can see the thoughts in her mind. Am I ever going to be beautiful? Am I ever going to have any kind of shape? Am I ever going to be found desirable by anybody? There's just so many questions. And it's just amazing how he can create all of this in one picture. And he does a magnificent job. This is delightful. This is known as First Prom. And here in this little bitty town, the young man has taken the young lady to the prom, and he has stopped at the little store where the young man often goes in after school to get a drink on the way home. And I've loved the two adults in this picture, because the soda jerk behind the counter, he is just doing wonderfully good things, trying to support this couple and encourage this couple. And then you get the other guy next to the young lady, and he's looking at him going, oh my goodness sakes, really? And it's really an interesting thing, because you can see stages of life and life perception and all kinds of things. Again, great Rockwell art. Why do we read? Rockwell is trying to tell us the reason that we read is to see the world. And here he has a picture of a young man sitting down at night at a table with a lamp on, and then behind him in the young man's mind is the adventures of the world. And it's a wonderful reminder of the importance of reading. This is really quite an interesting story. The Rockwells were living in Vermont in 1942, and one morning, early in the morning, a fire broke out in their studio. And they're all in the home, asleep, and the fire broke out, and this little drawing is what Rockwell drew to try and highlight the steps of the events of the night and into the next day. And when you go through this, you can actually see the very important points. You can see the original house, and then next to it the small studio that caught on fire, and you can see the phone call, and you can see the fire engines coming, and you can see the firemen running, trying and bringing their hoses. And you can see not only did the studio burn down, so did over half the house. And you can see the next morning, Rockwell has gathered the firemen in and serving them breakfast and thanking them for saving what they did. And it's a magnificent little story of the event. Rockwell drew this and had it published in the town newspaper, thanking the fire department for the efforts that they made to save what they could. From our perspective, this is incredibly sad, because there were over 1,000 pieces of Rockwell art that was destroyed. Thankfully for all of the family, nobody was injured, and that's the real blessing, because you can replace most anything, but you can't replace life. But it's a delightful vision of what happened to the Rockwells. And it also had something to do with the effect, had something to do with the change, because he starts to take on, after this, more of a serious tone, and you see a lot more social awareness. One of the examples, this is his famous drawing of Rosie the Riveter, and it's his tribute to the generation of women, of the generation that has become known as the greatest generation because of Tom Brokaw's incredible book. And not only did we have wonderful men, we had a wonderful generation of generals that came forth in World War II. We had a wonderful generation of American men that joined the military and fought world wars on both sides of the world simultaneously. And we also had a wonderful generation of women that stepped up and went into the workforce and took over where the men had left, and things didn't even slow down. And this is Mr. Rockwell's tribute to the incredible accomplishments of the women of that era. Franklin Roosevelt gave a very, very amazing speech early in the war. It really became known as the Four Freedoms. And he, Roosevelt, highlighted the four freedoms and talked about the importance of those freedoms. Rockwell painted, and it took him over a year to paint paintings representing the four freedoms. The first one is the freedom of speech. We have the right to stand up and say virtually anything we want to say. And that's what this man is doing at a town hall meeting, and he's expressing his opinion. And people are looking at him, and they're listening to him because they value his opinion. That is an airman's jacket. That is a veteran. And they're recognizing that this man has seen and done incredible things, and his opinion is worth listening to. And that's what freedom of speech is all about. This one says across the top, each according to the dictates of his own conscience. And Rockwell is trying to explain the importance of freedom of religion. We have the opportunity to worship how or where or what we may. We can go to church of our choice or not. We can donate money to the church of our choice or not. And all of that is perfectly okay. And we can live next door to an array of different religions. And in America, that's perfectly okay. One of the wonderful blessings of living in America. This is freedom from fear. Every child should be raised in a home where he and or she can feel the security of parents who are there and who love that child and will protect that child. And our homes should be a refuge and a beautiful representation of that. And this one is freedom from want. He picks out and creates a wonderful setting of a Thanksgiving dinner, and that looks like a nice Thanksgiving dinner. I want to just jump right into the picture, and I want to have a seat at that table, because that looks like a good table to be there for Thanksgiving. And what a wonderful thing. And quite frankly, we don't even think about freedom from want. Why not? Because if we need something, for the most part, we go down to the grocery store and we get whatever we need, whenever we need it. And it's a wonderful blessing of living in America and having that freedom. Now, I mentioned a minute ago what Rockwell did with these paintings. He donated those paintings to the United States War Department. And he said, take these paintings and sell them individually or as a set, and sell them to generate money for war bonds. Not only did the greatest generation fight the greatest war, and not only did they respond by helping in the manufacturing in that war, they also financed that war. It was amazing. And Rockwell donated the art that helped to do that. And then when the young men came home, you saw scenes like this across America, and you saw young men going to workshops all over. They were everywhere across America. And everybody wanted to know, what did you see and how did you feel? And obviously this young man served in the Pacific Ocean because he's holding a Japanese flag. And everybody of all ages, and there in the picture, you can see all different ages. Everybody wants to see and hear him. And what did you go through? And they want to know. In 1960, there was a presidential election, and John F. Kennedy won the presidency in one of the closest elections we'd ever had. And in the spring of 1961, he helped create a concept that became known as the Peace Corps. And that Peace Corps did something because it gave young men and young women an opportunity to become involved with the Peace Corps and then assigned and be sent all over the world to help bring about good things. And you might go to Africa and you might help dig wells that will literally help that community have fresh water for the first time. You might help build very primitive homes. You might do all kinds of things. And it's still a wonderful organization that impacts the service and lives of people from all over the world. And this is Rockwell's tribute to the Peace Corps, and you can see there in the upper left-hand corner President Kennedy, who had helped bring about this concept. In 1963 was a very, very sad time, and there was a couple of events. First of all, in Birmingham, Alabama, in September of 1963, there was a bombing at a church, and in that bombing, it was incredibly sad because there were children in that church. And in 1998, the man who had created that bombing was arrested and tried and found guilty. The early 1960s were a time of integration that was very, very difficult to pull out. This is a picture of Ruby Bridges, and in this particular picture, the Supreme Court had ordered integration in our schools, and various states and state governors were not about to let that happen. And federal troops were brought in and had to usher her to school. I've always been thankful that when I taught school at a time where, quite frankly, we didn't care about the color of anybody's skin, and I sure didn't. And our job was to simply help raise the standards of all these young people who were brought into our room. And I look at a picture like this, my heart breaks. What is interesting about this is that in 2012, Ruby Bridges, as a much older person obviously, was brought to the White House, and President Obama gave her a Presidential Medal of Freedom. The Obama White House had made arrangements to have this particular picture loaned to the White House and was put on display that day that Ruby Bridges was in the White House. Mr. Rockwell is trying to show us that we have rights of choice. That's what makes this picture so interesting, because you have a new family moving in that's obviously an African-American family into a neighborhood that may not have even had too many or even any African-American families. And then you have the kids of the neighborhood coming over to get acquainted. And you get to choose right there. How are you going to be and what are you going to do? And it's a wonderful moment in time. If you've ever taken children on vacation, you'll identify with this bit, because the top half of the picture shows the family. They're loaded up in the car. Dad's driving. Mom is all excited. The kids are in the back seat, and in the far back is Grandma. And in the bottom half of the picture, they're all coming home, and Dad is just barely making it, and Mom is just completely out of it, and the kids are just bored to tears, and Grandma's in the back seat. And it's just a delightful reminder that the going and coming and vacation is quite an interesting process of the family life and growing up in America. The next few pictures are of baseball. You can see this young man who's about to come up to bat. Does anybody on the team behind him have any faith in that he is going to be able to accomplish anything? Do the fans behind him have any faith in him? And obviously the answer is no. And it reminds us how important it is to be able to believe in ourselves and be able to accomplish good things. Strong picture. This is also an interesting baseball picture because it shows, is it going to rain? And the umpires are trying to decide, and the managers are arguing, and the players are trying to figure out, and should we call the game, and just what should we do? And it's a wonderful, wonderful part of the story of the lore of baseball. This one is a picture in the Boston Red Sox dugout. It's called The Rookie. Here is this rookie who's been brought up from the minor leagues, and all the veterans are sitting around going, "You're the answer to our problems?" And he's just sitting there just smiling and beaming and convinced that he's on top of the world. It's all about perception. This picture is from the Saturday Evening Post, and it's a cover in April of 1968. And you have this elderly couple, and then several things are fascinating about this particular cover, because above them, it looks like two of their children are checking in on them just to see if they're okay. But the couple themselves are sitting there playing and talking and playing. There's a checkerboard there in front of them, and I don't know if you can actually see it or not, but they're wearing roller skates and or ice skates. Could they even get up and move on those? No, heavens no. And I've just always thought this is absolutely fascinating. As we continue to grow and change in our lives, and as we age, he is trying to tell the story, and it's just a delightful, delightful story. And it's one of the many reasons why Rockwell art touches us. This is called the self-portrait for obvious reasons. And he's drawing a picture of himself. He's got a big board set up, and he's drawing the picture there, and he's looking around and looking in the mirror and then drawing himself. And what's interesting about this is in the upper right-hand corner of the paint board, there are 4 different small pictures. Those pictures represent very famous self-portraits of some of the great artists of the world, including Johann Vermeer, including Pablo Picasso, and including others. And what Rockwell is trying to show, he is trying to say, look, one of them is Albrecht Dürer. He's trying to say, look, these are the greatest, some of the greatest artists, and I need to be a part of this conversation of great artists. Is that something that Rockwell would have campaigned for publicly? No. He was such a humble man and such a good man and such a kind man. But that's why I've always loved this one, because it absolutely shows deep down, yeah, he believed he was good. And if it's going to take a vote on it, I vote for that. Yeah, he's darn good. This is kind of an interesting one because it appears that he's got all kinds of things going on at the same time. Are any of us ever guilty of that? We're trying to do different projects at the same time, and he's going to there and then putting something here and then painting over here, and then, oh, I need to add it over this, and I need to do this too, and he's constantly moving, and it's kind of the way I live my life. And it's just delightful to see that he's trying to put all this together to make it all make sense. This is another reminder of how he felt about children. He often needed children to be models. And here is this little 5-year-old little girl, and he's trying to comfort her and help her to understand what he needs for her to do and how it's not going to be hard, but he's just trying to gently talk her through it. And again, showing a very kind-hearted willingness to help a child. This one is absolutely delightful because this girl, she appears to be probably 10, 12 years old. She's quite proud of herself. She's also got a black eye, and she's been called in the principal's office, And the principal's going, oh no, now what in the world do I do? And she's convinced nobody has to do anything because she's solved the problem. She has. And what a delightful picture. This is a picture of young boys who've been in their favorite swimming hole and obviously got caught, and they are running away before they literally get caught. And it's delightful to see them, but it's even more fun because right in the middle you see that little dog running between them, also trying to make the quick getaway. Do we ever completely grow up? This is a Saturday Evening Post cover in August of 1945, and obviously this man has been driving down an old country road, and he gets to a bridge and he starts across it, and then he backs up and he gets out of his car and he walks down that bank, and he's hung up his clothes and everything, and he jumps into the water because it's summertime and he just wants to cool off. This is one of two paintings of Abraham Lincoln by Mr. Rockwell, and I've always loved this because this one shows us two halves of Abraham Lincoln. On the one side, on his right hand, he's holding an axe. And that axe is how he and his father, early in his life, made their living. You would hire them to go clear out land and cut down trees and split logs, and that's why he became known as the rail splitter. On the left hand, he is holding a book, and he is reading the book, much to his father's chagrin, because his father pulled him out of education after first grade and said that's all a waste of time. And Abraham Lincoln spent his whole life reading wherever he would go. He would try to borrow a book or anything to read. And that's why I've always loved this, because it shows both parts, very important parts of Abraham Lincoln. This picture shows what Lincoln looked like in the 1850s and where he made his living, literally going from town to town as a touring lawyer with two other lawyers, and they would go in and try cases. And they did very, very well and made a lot of money. And he became quite well known. I say made a lot of money. Do you know that they doubled the size of their house in the late 1850s? Well, you don't do that unless you've got pretty substantial income coming in. And also, that made him well known enough to where when he ran for the Senate in 1858 against Stephen Douglas, everybody knew who Lincoln was. And he almost upset a sitting senator. And then the Republican Party came to him and made him the nominee in 1860, and he ended up winning that election and becoming our 16th president. This is the tribute to Theodore Roosevelt by Mr. Rockwell. Roosevelt died in 1919, so Mr. Rockwell was 25 when Mr. Roosevelt died. Did Rockwell know Roosevelt? Absolutely. And a very moving tribute to Theodore Roosevelt, one of our strongest and most dominant presidents. This is Rockwell's tribute to the Kennedy brothers, and much more specifically to Senator Bobby Kennedy and what could have been. And it's going to be one of those things that we will never know, because Bobby Kennedy in 1968 was well on his way to winning the Democratic nomination for the presidency in the 1968 election when he was shot and killed in Los Angeles, California at the age of 42. This one is also Rockwell's painting where he was asking the government, the people of America have the right to know. And they're literally wanting to know what our government is going to be doing and holding our government accountable. And we still have that right to know. If you look closely at this painting, in the far right-hand side of the painting, you can see that Mr. Rockwell has included himself as one of the people in the painting. And it's a beautiful, beautiful painting. In the early 1960s, Rockwell went to Los Angeles and they had him do some art. And some of that art was paintings of famous people, and I include that section of this as part of that section of his life. And gentlemen, stand up and put your hand over your heart. This is John Wayne. And you don't get a whole lot better. And the movies that he made and the messages that he created and how he defined America and the patriotism he felt for his country. And it's a great painting. This is Mr. Rockwell's tribute to President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Not only president, but also the man who designed the largest invasion in world history with D-Day and ran it successfully. I've loved this particular quote from Rockwell about President Eisenhower. He said, "Eisenhower had about the most expressive face I've ever painted, I guess, just like an actor's, very mobile. When he talked, he used all the facial muscles, and he had a great wide mouth that I liked. When he smiled, it was just like the sun came out." I've seen a lot of pictures of Eisenhower, and read a lot about Eisenhower. I never completely understood it until I read Rockwell's quote, and I thought, maybe that's part of the appeal. Eisenhower had a sincerity about him that just absolutely made you believe, and did a great job in whatever he did. If you've ever had children in your home at Christmas time, this absolutely touches your heart, because here this young boy is taking a candle and gotten up and walked over to the fireplace, and he's trying to look up the chimney in the fireplace and see, is Santa really going to come down? And whenever I see this, I'm reminded of a conversation I had with my mother when I was probably about 6 years old, something like this. I grew up here in the valley. I grew up in Glendale, Arizona. We didn't have a fireplace, and we had air conditioning. And I went to my mother one time, and about that age, and I said, Mom, we don't have a fireplace. How is Santa Claus going to come down into our house at Christmas time and bring us stuff? And she said, don't worry about it. We've got air conditioning ducts. And for some reason, that seemed to make it all okay. If my mom said it, it must be okay. And but every time I see this picture, I think of that conversation, and I think of what I thought about at that time. I've loved this particular picture because this is another one that a story could easily have been written. And this is showing of a young lady who grew up out in the middle of nowhere with her family, and then she got old enough and went away to the big city and got a job. And at Christmas time, she's bought presents for the family and has caught the train and come home, and Dad has taken the cart out with the horse and pick her up, and he's bringing his daughter home for Christmas so the family can be all together at Christmas time. And it's just absolutely a delightful portrayal of Christmas. Whenever I see this particular picture of this young man walking up to this old watchmaker, I look at it and I remember a quote from Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, when he said that anything you can do to better the life of a child is a good thing. And I look at this and I'm going, thank you, sir, for trying to take the time to help this little boy understand that there is a world to learn out there. And what a beautiful representation of that. This is another representation of a couple of little kids and reading and what we can see in our world through the pages of a good book. And I've just always loved the concept of reading. In 1969, the United States landed men on the moon, and what an incredible accomplishment in that summer. On July the 20th, 1969, they actually came down out of orbit around the moon and landed on the moon, and Neil Armstrong walked down those steps and said those immortal words, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. And this is Mr. Rockwell's tribute to that event, and a beautiful, beautiful representation of that event. In 2001, in the spring, Phoenix Art Museum somehow made connections with the Rockwell Museum in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, and brought all kinds of Rockwell stuff. My wife and I were able to go through and see all this, and they have all 323 covers of Saturday Evening Post that Rockwell created, and many other things. And it was so fun to walk up and down those rows and see all those covers and remember, and obviously many of them predated me, and it was fun to see all of this in one place at one time, and what an incredible experience that was. This is a picture by Mr. Rockwell that's not really well known. Why? Because Steven Spielberg bought the original many, many years ago, and he hung it in his office in Los Angeles. And according to Mr. Spielberg, every time he's about to make a movie, he goes and stands in front of this painting. And the painting is named High Dive. And that young man has climbed up, way up on this tower, and he's about to go off, and then he realizes that's a long ways down. And he's peeking over trying to decide. And Spielberg said, that's how I feel before I ever start to make any movie. But then I decide I can do this, and I go ahead with it. And he said, but I always need the picture by Mr. Rockwell to remind me I can do this. This is the number one reason why we love Norman Rockwell art. We love Norman Rockwell art because he shows us it's okay to love each other and show that we care. And this little girl is sitting on the lap of her grandfather, and he's trying to help her understand that her world is really going to be okay. And ladies and gentlemen, that's the world that Norman Rockwell created. A world where we can begin to understand our world is really going to be okay. And I'm grateful that Norman Rockwell came along, and I'm grateful that he developed that incredible level of talent that he had, and I'm grateful that he created a vision of America unlike any that we've ever had before and probably since. And I'm so thankful for what he has done. And I'm thankful to share his life and his times and a small fraction of his art with you today. Thank you for being here, and I appreciate the opportunity. Good day.